Here we go. First of the week, it is SEC football and beyond. I'm Dan Matthews. He's Chris Landry, and we always appreciate you all joining us here on the show as we get into everything that is happening around the SEC, as well as some other huge news in college football that we will cover today. Chris, busy weekend around the league, but also around college football because it's that two favorite words that football fans love to hear of a college football team. If it's not the opening game of the season, they love to hear the two words, fall camp.
And no question about it. Obviously, pretty much everybody getting under the way by this weekend. And I know we're going to get to some news pretty early on about what's going on, some roster moves and how guys, it's kind of early, but there's some news nonetheless.
Well, let's start with the news that transcends the SEC. It's just college football in general, and that is the tragic passing on Sunday of Florida State head coach Bobby Bowden. Of course, many other stops that includes West Virginia as well. Chris, you've been around scouting, you've been around coaching, you've been around administration of the game for a long time. I've got to believe there were a lot of different times that you rubbed elbows with the legendary football coach.
Yeah, I did. I got to know him and, two of his sons, three, really. I didn't know Jeff as good as I knew Tommy and Terry, but got to know him, worked at a couple of camps with him at Florida State back in the day, and worked, spoken in some clinics with him, some coaching clinic stuff, and him being around. A great storyteller, great guy. Everything you hear about him, love people. Was always engaging. He made you feel like he was a lifelong friend, even if you just met him. But just a pleasure to be around. Just a good old folksy, fatherly figure to his players, and as he got older, grandfather figures. I've learned how he grew up in Alabama and wanted to play at Alabama, and how he fell in love early and left because he didn't have any married people at Alabama and in the program, so he went to Howard, and as he said, I had to put a ring on her. She she was catting around. He said, and I had to. So he, and a couple of things that jumped out at me, and I mentioned this on another show. I don't know that he ends up making it to Florida State if the world was to the way it was today, because he was very close to getting fired a couple of times at West Virginia. In one particular time, and they allowed you to work through your troubles. They weren't paying off coaches, or in fact, half the time they didn't even have contracts. They didn't want to be bothered, and just do what you can, give them another year. And it was, people may been disgruntled, but who? That you didn't have social media, you didn't have that type of impact. So he ended up. In fact, there was one year there was a vote to vote him, and it was like 6-5 to keep him one more year, and he got a little bit better, and he stayed another year. I remember what he did for the Marshall program in '70 when that tragic plane crash took place. I remember how he built West Virginia. He turned them around, and he went back home. Remember, he was an assistant at Florida State, so he went back home there, and he built something that he went on the road. He played 8 road games. He just, they didn't have a home stadium. They didn't have a home atmosphere. He built it that way. So he is Florida State football. Florida State football had only been around about 30 years. A good friend of mine that I work with, Larry Jones, was the head coach before Bobby got there. And there just wasn't anything there. And he was later worked together with him at LSU. I remember that, and I remember how he just built something that wasn't there. I remembered he shared with me that I'd heard the rumors, but he wanted the LSU job to replace Charlie Mack. But he was really young, and he wasn't Bobby Bowden then. He had just been a couple of years at Florida State. But the job he really wanted was the Alabama job. The job that went to Bill Curry. He thought he had it, and the board kind of did their own thing. But, yeah, just everything you hear about him, what a great individual, a great person. He told some great stories. And I kind of said it's a celebration of life. He's 91 years old, and he's impacted a lot of folks. He's lived a great life, and that's what I want to focus on. And prayers to all the family. But what a great guy, and he truly was authentic.
Now, I mean, just kind of housekeeping here before I get to a couple, because I never had a chance to meet him. But when you mentioned that he wanted that LSU job, was that the one that went to Bo Ryan, or was that after?
It did.
Okay.
Yeah, in which we didn't get into that, but often said, because for people who don't know real quick, Bo Ryan got the job, and Bo Ryan never coached a game. He tragically died in a plane crash. In what you don't know, and this is whoever would have gotten that job, would they have been on that plane at that time in that moment, or would the schedules have been different? He was, for people who don't know, he was on the Tiger Athletic Foundation plane, and it went from Baton Rouge to Shreveport, and then he was in a recruiting trip, and he was coming home from Shreveport to New Orleans to actually speak at the coaching convention in New Orleans. But they had bad weather, and they had to go north to circle around, and the plane just took off. It went over the Atlantic Ocean. Well, you don't know. Whoever would have been on that plane that night with the same pilot doing the same thing would have suffered the same tragic loss. But it doesn't mean that whoever would have been the coach, maybe the schedule would have been different. We'll never know. Only the good Lord will know. And Coach Bowden, I never went down that path with him, but it made you think he probably would have said something along the lines of, the Lord has a plan for all of us, and my plan was to be here, but yes, that was when he was interested, and I don't think he was. I think there was some level of interest, perhaps, when Coach Orangeburger left, but I don't know that it was quite that. It never went as far, but.
I mean, you never know in life, that's for sure. And, I've shared this earlier on the Chuck Oliver show that I never had a personal interaction with Coach Bowden, but it does seem like everybody who ever came across with him had a very positive interaction. Chuck told a pretty funny story today and it seems right on board with what everybody else has told as well, Chris, is that he was about to sit down with him when Chuck was doing some TV work at the time. And I don't know if it was his SID or his director of football ops, whoever it was, said, Coach is going to ask you how you're doing. And he's just like, okay. And he goes, no, he's going to ask you how you're doing, and it's not going to suffice of just I'm okay, Coach, or, hey, things are good. He wants to know how you're doing. And not a lot of people in his position would take the time to do that. I love the story that Nick Saban told on Sunday, where he told the story. For those of you that don't know, go back and listen to it. It's a fantastic quote from Nick Saban where he said that his father had passed and that Bobby Bowden, when he was starting off as a graduate assistant, picked up the phone and called him and said, hey, look, I know that Huntington, West Virginia is a lot closer than where you are at Kent State. If you want to come home, be close to your family. I know your mom's probably struggling right now. I got a job for you if you want to do that. And the way that Saban said it is he said, not a lot of people like him would do that. And that really tells you the person that he was. So the world is going to miss him. James Coleman, one of his former players, a fullback that played for him, Chris. We had him on the Chuck Oliver show today, and he said, there are no Bobby Bowdens now. It's just you don't make people like that anymore, and that's really a testament to the man himself. So he will be missed for sure. And of course, our prayers go to the Bowden family as they deal with this very tough time of grief. Let's get to the SEC news here on SEC Football and Beyond. I want to remind you all as well that you can catch SEC Football and Beyond by subscribing right here to the Landry Football Podcast channel. You can also find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And Chris, it was a busy weekend of the first weekend of fall camp. This coming weekend, we will get the scrimmages as we're inching closer to Labor Day weekend when we really kick this thing off in earnest. What's happening around the league?
Well, something that I thought was going to happen a long time ago has finally happened now. John Rice Plumlee has officially moved to wide receiver at Ole Miss. Really a good move there. Certainly did some things in the bowl game. He understands where his future is. Good fit there. Obviously, Matt Corral's firmly entrenched. They like some of their young quarterbacks. So that's good news there, I think, for the Ole Miss offense. It should be pretty good. Tough news that I don't know where this is going to go, Dan, but McKinley Jackson, the freshman defensive line from A&M, who I thought was going to play an awful lot right next to Neal, was arrested on drug charges on Friday after our show had dropped. So I don't know. He's been released out on bail. He's been suspended. I don't know where this is going, but that's a good player that they were counting on. that the status is up in the air. Another guy who obviously is getting some tough love from Coach Nick Saban is the fine tight end Jaleel Billingsley, the freshman tight end. He was back at practice on Monday after missing Friday session, and Coach Saban wasn't shy about saying, he's got to get his priorities in order, and so whatever that is very, very cryptic. There's a message there. The message is we'll see where he goes, but he's a young man that they feel can be very athletic and help them in the passing game. Now, Cameron Latu would be the other guy that would work in. Also over the weekend, Kentucky running Joey Gatewood with the first-team offense. Curious to see how that plays out and how that develops, where that goes. So those are the things that came out of the practice from talking to the coaches. A bit of a recruiting news, positive for A&M, getting a big-time commitment from a safety I love a lot, a four-star kid that actually committed to LSU back in September. Bryce Anderson's a really sought-after kid, a top 15 player in the state of Texas. Auburn, Alabama, Florida State. I mentioned Georgia, Miami, LSU, Beaumont, Texas did so. Good for them. And then the news that came out, and we probably will need to talk a little bit about this, but Scott Cochran stepping aside at Georgia. Scott Cochran, you may remember, longtime strength coach at Alabama. Knew Scott when he was at John Curtis High School and was an assistant over at LSU's strength coach, and Nick brought him over to Alabama. Last year, was it last year? I've lost track 2 years ago.
It was last year. Yeah,
last year.
Brought in the guy from Indiana.
Yeah, well, last year, Scott left, and there was some issues that were going on behind the scenes with some lack of focus in his job and some things that happened. So, obviously, I couldn't remember if it was last year or the year before. Yeah, it was last year that Nick brought in Dr. Matt Ray and David Ballou from Indiana, and that was kind of he nudged Scotty out the door, and Scott looked at other options. Of course, good friends with Kirby Smart. They brought him over as an on-field coach and to kind of help oversee special teams. Look, I don't know. They're kind of being cryptic, and I think it's tough, Dan, in the age of privacy. You got to deal with certain things. I know there was some, like I said, some issues at Alabama. I think maybe it's being described now, maybe in today's world, as, okay, mental illness or mental whatever, health. I'm sorry, not mental health.
Yeah, mental health.
So hope that he can, whatever the issues are, don't know whether he's coming back right now. I don't think that's something we need to worry about. Will Muschamp will be put into an on-field role, as they normally do. They will absorb the special teams duties among the staff. But this is one of the advantages of having staffs of experienced guys that can jump in on field that, boom, you can just go right in. Imagine in the day when you'd lose a guy this late for whatever reason, the difficulties that you're in. But that was certainly something that something happened recently, or this move would have been made a few weeks ago. Sure. So, we wish Scott the best, and I don't know. I know the door's open to come back, but we'll see.
Yeah, and that's the really important part right there. There's a couple of housekeeping notes on this for just really the way that stories like this go, Chris, as you know very well, is that he is not off the staff. That is something that I have read and seen and heard many different places. So that's important to point out. He is not off the staff. The other part of it as well is that, yes, from what I understand, Will Muschamp is going to be stepping into the on-field role. And the other part of it as well is there were people that thought, is this a vax issue? Because we get the news over the weekend that Ole Miss is 100% vaccinated. And we had Seth Emerson, who does a fantastic job covering Georgia of The Athletic. He was on the Chuck Oliver show on Monday, and he said, I quickly put that to bed. That it was not a vax issue. It's not any of those things. But yes, it's right for Georgia to be private about this, because this obviously is a private matter. It's important enough for him to step away from the field and step away from his everyday job. And we hope, look, we've seen other people without drawing conclusions here that have been able to step away, and he might come back. He might not. You don't know. So the most important thing in all of this, Chris, is that Scott Cochran receives the help that he obviously needs right now, according to the statements that have been put out by the program.
And no question about it. Wish him the best there, no doubt.
Absolutely. Well, that's the news from around the SEC. For more notes around the SEC as well as college football nationally, NFL, the draft. It's never too early to think about the draft. Recruiting, head on over to LandryFootball.com. Chris, Clemson, speaking of Georgia, let's talk about the more positive parts of the storyline of this offseason for Georgia. If you want to say playing against a team that's a perennial college football playoff participant as a positive, I think that probably some would say, yeah, that's a positive because that's going to be an awesome game in Charlotte on September the 4th. Tell us about the Clemson Tigers.
Yeah, I thought it would be good because we'll get deep into that Clemson Georgia game as it gets a little closer, and it's not too far away as you're alluding to. But Clemson is really the only team we haven't. Well, we've talked a little bit about Ohio State, but with the contending teams for the playoffs, who's kind of in the mix? And a lot of people have asked about Clemson and how would they fare as a program in the SEC and whatnot. And we're going to see a little bit of kind of the comparison on the field, but just to kind of take a look at this program over the past few years, they've won a couple of titles, and when you can beat Alabama, it says a lot about where you are and where you are. A lot of people, Dan, throw in the fact that, well, they're in the ACC and it's an easy run. I do think they have great opportunity to develop their team year in and year out because they do play a little softer schedule. They average playing 12 more players a game than any other program in the country, and it has a lot to do with the fact that they put teams away. But they're very talented, and at other times, sometimes they're a little bit more than others. They're still in a class by themselves in the ACC. No one's that close, and people will make a claim that North Carolina is. I think they're still a ways away from where Clemson is. The offense, I think, is going to be interesting to watch, that they're going to look a little different. DJ Ungole is a talented thrower, but he doesn't give them as much in the run game that Trevor Lawrence did. Trevor Lawrence bailed them out of some failed plays, not only with his arms, but with his legs. The wide receivers may not be as good. The defense is going to be better, though, because they got a lot more experience and they played a lot of younger guys. The defensive line should be very, very good again. Maybe as good as anybody in the country. I think Brent Venables does a outstanding job of rebuilding scheme and around the personnel. And defensively, they had the best operate in the ACC and the ninth best in the country last year. Best Power 5 defense, getting to the quarterback. The second best, defense overall in the country when you grade them on film, I thought. But offensively, I thought they were very effective last year. They need to improve their offensive line. They were inconsistent last year in the run game in particular. But then we get into the playoffs, and the defense was humbled in the playoffs versus Ohio State. They struggled on all three levels. They just weren't physical enough, and the pace hurt them. So the one thing in talking with Brent Venables this offseason is that they were that stuck just like a rock in their shoe. It just really irritated them. So they started working on tempo a lot more because their standard is not getting to the playoffs but winning in it. The offense has averaged 43 points a game for the past 3 years, but they've lost some good defensive players. So it's about offensive line play. It's about getting the running game going, obviously not being able to use the quarterback in the run game is a bigger issue, and then I think defensively becoming more of a dominant team, that's going to be key. I thought last year, and I mentioned this, that they also missed in the playoffs when you lose their offensive coordinator, Tony Elliott, and they lacked that presence of being able to call a game. And Dabo wasn't really good at it, and they were really confused, and I thought it gave a lot of problems. Here's the other thing I will criticize Dabo for doing. People love it. Dan, you may like it. I don't know, a lot of people, he shoots from the hips and he talks about it. When you say things like, I don't think they should be in the playoffs. You vote them 11th. It's just not smart. Some things you just don't say. You got a really good team that you're playing. Just don't give them the edge. I don't think it's a big deal. I just think it's unnecessary and kind of foolish. And why I always was told this: don't write a check that somebody else has got to cash. So you put a little bit more in your team there that you didn't need to. That's not being good head coaching. It may come across as cute. I don't think it's real smart. I just think that's something he could learn from. Because I can tell you this, it pissed a lot of people off in Columbus, Ohio, in that football office. And you don't need to have that extra stuff. And that's what guys like Nick Saban doesn't want young guys talking, because they tend to say stupid things. Well, you sit there and you tell your players to don't say stupid things, and use the head coach does them. That's something that I'm old school that I think he can improve upon. Just saying.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and I think that probably even truth serum right there. Dabo would say, yeah, not a good idea to go that route. But just a couple of things that you mentioned there, because defensively, I think we can agree that is the strength of this team, even with DJ Uiagalelei and some of the weapons that he has on that side of the ball, which we'll break down here in just a second. But defensively, with up front, with Brazee, somebody who came onto the scene and played very well as a true freshman. Not easy to do up there on the defensive line, and he lived up to the billing of being one of the top recruits in the country. And then Miles Murphy, the same deal out of him. Really able to get some good things. James Skalski back. That's going to be huge because, Chris, let's take a look at where both games in New Orleans started to go sideways for Clemson. It was when Skalski got ejected from the game for targeting. So he had the hit last year on Justin Fields. The year before, I don't think it was a hit on Burrow. I think it was a hit on a receiver.
Yes.
That got him thrown out of the game. But regardless, it got him thrown out of the game. And when you I always look at defense a lot like baseball and how they talk about how strong your defense is. In baseball, you're only as strong as the guys up the middle. You got a good catcher, you got a good second baseman and shortstop, and you got a good center fielder. You got a good, strong defense. And in football, it's the same deal. You got a really good inside linebacker that can line everybody up, knows the calls, and knows the way that the defense is supposed to move. You don't just replace that when that guy goes off the field. So I don't think there's any real coincidence in that. Will Shipley is a name that I'm hearing a lot out of camp right now. And a lot of people during the spring, everybody that we've had on the Chuck Oliver show that talks about Clemson, and everybody that I've talked with said that kid's the real deal. Look for him this year as well. The offensive line, that is a question. Because they have had their struggles at times. And remember last week when we talked about the guys they're going to face on September the 4th, I said that offensive line, I had some worries about it. But then some people could say, well, look at the defensive line they were going against in the spring game. It doesn't matter. You're going against guys that you know their weight, you know their push, you know all those different types of things. That should give you an advantage when you go against those guys. And the fact that they had their struggles at times was a little worrisome. So I think that's going to be a huge question mark for this Clemson team. I think if nothing else, it's going to be a question that needs to be answered for either them or for Georgia, because whoever has the answer that day, they're going to be weighing it in. Of course, over the weekend, we find out the news about Justin Ross. That's a huge boost for that offense.
Yeah, I think Walker Parks is a guy that can kind of be the identity of their offensive line, the tough, lunch pail, physical guy. But I worry I think there's talent there, no question. I just didn't think they did a very good job in the run game getting things going. And you just mentioned it. I thought the pace that Ohio State put against the defense, that's what really rankled them, is that they couldn't get lined up. And those talented guys on defense, and you're right, Brazee is special, but they couldn't get lined up, and they were gashed against the run. And I think they understand they're going to see that at the highest level. And I think they're, maybe not see as much of that stylistically against Georgia, but, so they got guys. Thomas and Foster and Henry and Murphy and Davis, they've got a lot of guys besides Brazee that can rotate guys, but getting lined up and adjusting in snap between snaps is something that's really going to be pivotal for them. And they'll miss – Mike Jones didn't really fit them. So I think – but I do think the other kid that they have there that's very, very talented, the Trenton Simpson kid, the kid I'm trying to think of, is really talented. It's a big-time playmaker. So we'll watch that, and I think the secondary is going to be one that's a work in progress, but has a lot of ability to make plays on the back end.
Real quick before we get to the next part, with the secondary, does that talk about how deep that secondary is that you can lose a guy like Darian Kendrick to Georgia and still feel pretty good about what you have on the back end?
Absolutely. They feel good about it, and that's why he's moving on, and he's a need spot for Georgia. And Yeah, it was absolutely that, getting on the field and being part of the rotation. He's a good player, but I think that is absolutely a big part of it. And, you hope that you don't have the slew of injuries for Clemson's sake to where it doesn't come back to bite them. But that's a big part of it. They're recruiting really well. And look, Kevin Turner's born. Nolan Turner is one of the really special players on their team. That's a big-time force covering in a short area underneath against the run. And Spector is a good linebacker too. So I think that they're going to be a better defense. I really feel comfortable about it. I mentioned Shipley. Shipley just has got a lot of early stages. We'll see if he's got a mention. I mentioned last week, but it reminds me a little bit of Christian McCaffrey. So let's see if that develops.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think he wears number 7 as well, right? So maybe that's part of the comparison as well. Real quick, you got some top NFL draft prospects for 2022 that you're already starting to see that will emerge early on in the season and last throughout the season.
Well, I think everybody knows about Derek Stingley. He's certainly going to go high, and certainly I expect him to have a more productive year this year. But 6'1", 198 pounds, really special. But watch. And we'll see how high he goes relative to the quarterbacks and the big guys. So I want you to keep an eye on Marvin Leo from A&M. He's a junior, that he's a jumbo defensive end. We just discussed A&M's defensive line and Kinley getting out. This kid certainly wouldn't help him, but he's got some versatility to reduce down onto the next level. He's got first step quickness. This guy, how good of a year he has will determine how high. He could go real, real high. Evan Neal, I think, is the next, Alabama lineman, that offensive lineman that can be really good. I think that in terms of his run blocking is very good, but he really impressed me with his footwork and his technique and pass pro, and I'm curious to see how he's able to progress this year. I think the other corner to look for is Kareem Elam of Florida. I think he's outstanding. He's got a lot of ability. I think Jordan Battle has got a lot of ability. I think Georgia has a couple of guys. I think Adam Anderson in particular as an edge rusher. I'm looking to see what he can do. Can he be another Ojulari? I think that is very possible in his game. I think Nakobe Dean's another guy that's very good. And I like Kenyon Green, the tackle from A&M, the offensive tackle that's got really good feet, good pass protector. I'm not so sure that he's going to have big numbers, but Traylon Burks of Arkansas is the big physical receiver that looks like a Michael Thomas type of guy, quarterback play, and what Kendall Briles will be able to do with that offense. This guy is really as talented as any receiver in the SEC. Yet I don't know in terms of numbers, Dan, that even he's going to make any postseason SEC teams or not, because that usually goes to numbers and stats. They'll get him the football. I just don't know if they'll get it to him enough. I think this is a guy that will have a better pro career than a college career based upon, what his transferable skills are.
Yeah, and it's also, too, real quick on that with Arkansas, as you mentioned Kendall Briles there, and I mentioned this with Chuck the other day. Do you think that there's a chance that Sam Pittman could be known as another coaching rehab program? Because, Kendall Briles was kind of persona non grata a little bit in the coaching profession, and I think some people even raised their eyebrows when Sam Pittman made that decision. But I made the argument that there are a few coaches that people can look at and say, all right, if he's willing to give that guy a second chance, I'm not going to question him because that guy's high character. He's everything in between. And it seems like it's a good fit right now for both sides.
I never really thought about it, but that's certainly the case with Kendall. You're right. Now, does he do this with several other folks and it works out? That would probably put him in that category. I think you just hit on it. Sam's a good old boy. He's a really good guy. I think it certainly helped Kendall, no question. Look, I think there's nothing to do with character, but I think it's really kind of shown the spotlight on how good a coach Barry Odom is defensively. But I don't. That's a different situation than you're talking about.
Sure.
So I'm curious to see how that works with Kendall. It really does, because I think Kendall's a fast track guy, and I don't know. I don't know. There's conflicting thoughts on how involved Kendall was. I mean, just because his dad was, how much of that was on him? The stain was on him, and I don't know that maybe he should or shouldn't. I don't know. I think he should be judged on what he knew and what maybe he turned his back on at Baylor, and maybe, maybe not as much as his dad knew. So I'm happy for him that he's doing a good job, and hope that he can reclaim his spot, and because I think he's a fast track guy, no question.
Still time for plenty of you to get in on the mailbag, as we've got a couple of questions already. We will get to those at the end of the show. But Chris, as we have talked about, some national news already with the passing over the weekend of Bobby Bowden. Let's get into some other national bits of news. One of them, Arizona State, Herm Edwards, the Sun Devils. They have got some trouble that seems like it is on the way. I know some people probably look at it and say, well, what can the NCAA necessarily do anymore? The NCAA has still got reach. I think they're going to use it. We'll see what they do with Arizona State. The Sun Devils program placing assistant coaches Chris Hawkins and Prentice Gill on paid leave. This is part of the ongoing NCAA investigation into possible recruiting violations made by the school. They are going to join tight ends coach Adam Brenneman, who was placed on leave last month as part of the same investigation. The NCAA looking into Arizona State's program hosting prospects during the recruiting dead period, which of course went from the height of the pandemic, March 2020 to June 1 of this year. FBS programs were not allowed, of course, to have recruits on campus during that time. ASU also facing allegations of recruiting practices that occurred when the dead period ended, including possible improper contact with prospects at an off-campus recruiting camp earlier this month.
Well, it sounds like to me that they are throwing some coaches under the bus. I've no doubt on how things were done over there that Herm knew about it and they were all involved in. I mean, just the meeting with the recruits in the back. I don't know if it's most of these football operations has a back stairway. If you've been at Arizona State, when you're meeting with recruits, getting set up. I mean, it's not like you can say we didn't know about it.
Right.
So I don't know. That is what's difficult to figure out is the NCAA's role. Are they completely hands off, or they're gonna? I think that they're going to get involved in some of this, but have just kind of thrown their hands up? I mean, have they just have they gone into the fetal position because Congress said you don't have any power? Or are they gonna, act on some of this stuff? We don't know. I mean, you keep thinking about some of the stuff that's gone on in the NCAA that's lingered for so long. You would think something would happen. You clearly see what Arizona State's approach is. Hey, we're cleaning this up. We'll get the SOBs that were responsible for this. We'll get them out of there right now. So their stance on it. So they're going to okay, we're going to do that. Now, what do they have on them that they can prove? Otherwise, I just kind of almost take a wait-and-see approach. I don't know. I'm not pulling for anybody to get hammered. I'm just saying until I see somebody get punished, it's been a while since somebody's been punished for NCAA violations. You gotta refresh my memory there. I don't. It's been a while.
I mean, maybe Miami. I mean, USC is another one. I mean, because I think for the most part, people have gotten ahead of it, where they've said, like LSU this last year, oh, we're going to sit out the bowl season. That's our punishment that we're going to put on ourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's also, too, I mean, it's to the point where remember just how badly, I don't know if you ever read the book, Chris, The System, that was written by Armin Katane and I believe Jeff Benedict. And it just outlined in that just how badly the NCAA messed up Miami, that I think when Miami said you were paying people, you were doing all this, that's illegal. You can't do that. So we're off the hook now. Like, it just was an unbelievable situation. Like I said, go read the book if you want to get more on that one. But
real quick, how about the legal costs that the NCAA's incurred? And Miami's situation and what all these schools, look what North Carolina did with that. They're lawyering up. Yeah. It's like the NCAA's probably thinking, man, the heck with this. Go do what you want. We can't afford to lose any more money in courtroom because that's a new industry now. We'll sue the NCAA for
Right.
you, university, or Mr. Coach or Mr. University. I just think they are kind of in a shell now, unless they have it and it's just all right there. I don't know. I think it's fair game to do what you want.
I think
Like it or not.
the last ditch effort was when they brought on Tom Mars, who, remember, for all of these eligibility
Yeah.
cases, that he was representing these families and these players, and he was winning. So the NCAA finally said, all right, now let's pay his retainer and let's have him on our side. So maybe that was it. I don't know. But really, I would say that the guy that started all this was Johnny Manziel. I mean, remember how Johnny Manziel was pretty infamous now for telling the NCAA, hey, go step. Like, I'm not going to talk to you. And my legal counsel tells me I don't have to talk to you. You're not a legal body
That's right.
that I am under oath talking to. So
No subpoena power. No subpoena power.
No. So do what you want, and if it's something that I don't like, we're going to go to court. But they went ahead and just said, all right, fine, slap on the wrist, and we'll go from there. Real quick, in the SEC, something we didn't mention earlier, Missouri Tigers hiring UNLV's Desiree Reed-Francois as the first female athletic director at the school. She taking over for, I believe, Jim Sturck, who
Yes.
just stepped down as the athletic director there in Columbia, Missouri. But that's a program right now and the funny thing is, or not the funny thing, she really did some pretty cool stuff at UNLV. I think she's gotten them into the Raiders practice facility and gotten them into playing their games at Allegiant Stadium, because I've only flown over Sam Boyd Stadium, never been inside of it. I've been told that it's about the hottest stadium that you can be in if there is an afternoon game. But let's be honest here, UNLV, aside from a couple of good basketball seasons, has not overall been an athletic department that has raised a lot of eyebrows in terms of, we've got to pay attention to them. But her credentials are very, very much impressive. Former rower at UCLA, and now the first female athletic director there at Missouri, second in SEC history. Vanderbilt's Candace Story-Lee, the first.
Well, it's a new day, and I wish her well. I don't know her. I've never met her, and a lot of the athletic directors, if I've been around in coaching churches, I may know some more than others, but I don't know her. I didn't realize she was the one that kind of when she, as you mentioned, she had to be involved. But I know the alliance between the Allegiant Stadium and UNLV. They hope that can bring that program. That's been one in which they've kind of sold that this could be a lot of fun. And Ron Meyer took the job there, and they've just not been able to. Well, we did in basket. It's just not the same thing.
A little pop when John Robinson was there for a little bit.
John was there. That's right. It just hasn't really. It's not. It's anything but a collegiate environment. Not that it has to be. It's got to find their niche. They've had a long time. They brought in a really good coach years ago, Bobby Hawk, and we're going to do something here. And Bobby did a great job in Montana for years and just didn't do anything there. So finding their niche. Now, here's the thing about going into those big stadiums. It's great. You're indoors. Like going to Tulane when they went in the Superdome.
Yeah.
It's like, it was just, it just was tough. And now they've got their own little stadium. So in essence, and by the way, I have been in that stadium. It is hot, although most of the games that I went to, only one that I can remember during the day, most of them were at night. So I don't know. I don't know how that plays out. She did a good job there. So forget about UNLV for a second. What's she going to do at Missouri? It's a really good academic program, obviously. They're getting more money. Hopefully she can do some good things. And obviously, a second person, second lady that's an athletic director in the SEC in a very short time frame.
Yeah, just some of her quick credentials here. Oversaw Virginia Tech's football program as deputy athletic director there for the Hokies in Blacksburg. Also assistant athletic director roles at Tennessee. Fresno State as well as other schools. So,
Okay,
like I
so
said, good
she already.
qualifications and good background in the sport that matters the most in the conference she's going to.
So does that mean she probably worked for Jim Weaver? That's really good. Jim's really good athletic director. So yeah, they're good. So we wish her well and welcome her into the SEC.
All right, so this one is going to be huge, especially on the NFL side for the fantasy football players out there, because those of you who are looking to pick Saquon Barkley might not be a bad idea. Activated from the PUP list, which stands for physically unable to perform, so now he is returning to practice. Did so on Monday with the New York Giants. That's going to be a huge bit of good news for Daniel Jones, Joe Judge, and the New York Football Giants.
Yeah, listen, he's one of the best dual threat backs in the league. They've got a lot of weapons over with the Giants. He just didn't do a whole lot in the early stages. They're going to kind of gradually bring him through and hope they can avoid the injuries that some other teams are having right now in the early part of camp. I know Hunter Henry's down again. I hope his shoulder injury is not severe, but they took him off in a cart this weekend. That's not good. But Saquon's a special talent, no question about it, and I'm excited about what he can do for that offense this year. And Daniel Jones needs him as well as the other weapons that they've added to Joe Judge's team this year. It's going to be fun to watch Barkley get back to full strength. He's special. He really is a special talent when healthy. But coming off the ACL, I'm very curious to see how he develops. I don't expect him to get a whole lot of reps in preseason.
Yeah, I mean, if there is any semblance of someone being less than 100%, I mean, we saw it last weekend, although sounds like the shoulder with Dak Prescott. I guess that's another bit of news too, Chris, that he's back to some, as they're calling it, light throwing out in Oxnard, California for the Cowboys. But I would probably suspect at the very earliest, I would bet that we would see Dak Prescott playing in the last the final real preseason game, because we know that last one is always one where it's just players trying to make the roster.
Did you hear how he injured that shoulder?
I did not.
Okay. This is a lesson to learn. So, the special teams coach, they were having problems with the jugs machine. So they said, and this typically will happen, you will have a quarterback throw a punt, basically.
Oh.
You don't want your starting quarterback to. So he did it. He wasn't warmed up. So he literally, and for those of you that are watching on this, I will describe it for you for those of you that are not. That area underneath your throwing shoulder that's just kind of like right above your rib cage, he tweaked it. He wasn't quite warmed enough, and he's trying to help, and it's just sore. Nothing that is really dangerous or to be worried about, just stupid. And you just got to be careful with the little things like it's what the jug machines are for, and it's what for the camp arms are for. That's why we sign those guys. You don't have them do that. That's how it happened.
Camp bodies are there for a reason. Franchise quarterbacks are not supposed to be the heroes. You don't have to prove anything. You got the contract already.
He's just trying to help, and something, no big deal. Just an innocuous throw. I'm just going to help out, and there you go. There you go.
Apparently, I was watching a little bit of the Hall of Fame game last week, and they said that the Rangers, who are right around the corner from the Cowboys there outside of AT&T Stadium, they had to get in touch with the Rangers medical staff because this is an injury. I think it is kind of like obliques and everything that we see in baseball, is that it was one of those things that, hey, how do you treat this? How do you get back from it? But they believe that he will be ready to go for the start of the season. So, of course, we will see how that progresses. Hey, as we just went beyond in terms of the National College Football and also NFL news out there, you can always check them out as they are brought to you by LandryFootball.com. And remember, for much more detailed college football and NFL information, head on over to LandryFootball.com. Chris, let's get to some mailbag questions that we have to close us out here for the first episode of the week. Woodshed King, he is always the guy that we can count on as he jumps in with this question. You were talking about standout players that we could see this season. Well, this one is not going to be draft eligible just yet, but a lot of people in Baton Rouge really excited about what Mason Smith, the defensive tackle, can bring to them as a true freshman.
Yeah, no, he's a really good player. They're really excited about him there. He's backing up, working behind Glenn Logan. I did get to see some of their practice work on Saturday. For people who don't know, I live in Baton Rouge, so it's a little bit easier to go down and catch that one than any place else. But he's a very talented guy. Really shoots his hands very well. Just a little raw. Doesn't know what he's doing quite yet. That's okay. I think he'll help. He'll give some help behind Glenn Logan. That's an area where they feel they're going to be hopefully much improved from their standpoint.
Yeah, it would definitely help, especially even though the back end is much experience from last season. If you want to say that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think for the most part it's a good thing when you've got guys like Eli Ricks and also Derek Stingley there. I think that helps, and then we'll see what Major Burns. I know that there was some leaked footage from over the weekend, Chris. I know everybody always gets excited about the one-handed catches where he had a one-handed interception that got out there. And I'm sure probably Coach Ogeron is asking the film guys, hey, how did that get out? We don't want that getting out there. Look, it's nice to have the highlights, but let's keep the stuff that's supposed to be in-house.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't let that leak out.
All right, we got another mailbag question. This one came to us, Chris, off air, and I am really interested to hear your thoughts on this one, and that is, in college football, who has the best developmental programs? That is talked about a lot of how good programs are at developing talent.
Yeah, I think we have to define developmental programs, and Jesse, who sent that in, I'm going to define it because I think that's important. I look at developmental programs or programs that don't get the elite players but develop them very, very well. Because, I think Alabama probably does the best job. They're not a developmental program, though. They may do the best job of developing players, but they get elite players. So the ones that, if you want to use this vernacular, gets the 3 stars, maybe some of the high-level 2 stars, and develops them over time to really good players. I think right now, I would have to say the team that's doing it just as good as anybody is Iowa State. They are the anti-Big 12 team. They're physical. They punch in the mouth. They play 2 tight ends while everybody else is playing spread. They don't recruit high-level players, but they've got a really good quarterback. They've got a couple of good tight ends. They've got good running backs. They're very, very good. They do a good job. And over the long haul, yeah, Matt Campbell haven't done it that long. I probably would say that, and I'll take them maybe by conference, I would say that Utah and Kyle Whittingham, certainly out west, that's a team that's physical, that'll punch you in the mouth. They develop defensive linemen. It's the best special teams in the country from a assignment and a technique standpoint. Their offensive lines are very good. They're the most physical team in the Pac-12. And they say, well, that's not saying much. No, they can physically line up. They don't have a ton of skill. They recruit a lot on the islands well. They get a lot of guys that are out on missions, and they bring them back. They deal with that, not just BYU. They do. They're really, really good. Out in the ACC, I'm just going to take them by conference. I think that that Wake Forest does a good job at a kind of a mid-level, meaning they are very limited in talent, but they get a lot out of their team. I think over the past couple of years, I would say what Bronco Mendenhall is doing at Virginia is really, really good. They're developing well. And I think that Boston College has had a lot of success developing, over the years. But now they're doing it a little bit differently with Jeff Hafley. They're a little bit more up-tempo spread. Like they've got 3 good receivers in the ACC, whereas they normally are like some of the best at developing offensive linemen. I would say that the Big Ten I would say Kentucky would be the best developmental program in the SEC in terms of who doesn't get really good 4 or 5-star talent, but then they develop them well over time. I think Kentucky does the best job of that. Again, Alabama will develop players maybe better, but Kentucky is the best developmental program in the league. I think the Big Ten has the most if you think about it, Wisconsin and Iowa are the ultimate developmental programs. Iowa and Kurt Ferentz has been there for a long time. I mean, he's been there, and he's done it more consistently longer. Wisconsin and Iowa are very much the same, except Wisconsin recruits a little bit better. So Wisconsin will get some four-star linemen and will get some four-star running backs. Iowa doesn't. They develop all their guys very well. So those two would be candidates. Northwestern does a great job. Northwestern is the most physical team in the Big Ten, and they don't get a lot of elite talent. Now, they're trying to do the transfer portal thing with quarterbacks, but developing linebackers, developing overall defensive players, very, very good. They've got one of the best. Now, they've got one of the best safeties in the country, one of the best freshmen in the country. At safety. And then I would say that for a stretch, Michigan State did that under Mark D'Antonio. Now, towards the end, not so much. But now they could recruit a little bit lower. They're a little bit more like Wisconsin, but they had a little bit more skill. They could get a little bit more playmakers at receiver. But that would be the candidates. I would have to say that Iowa State, Utah, Wisconsin, Iowa would be the best in the country. That's kind of how I would see it.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of those in there really agreed with. Jeff Hafley, I know a lot of people very high on the job that he has already done at Boston College and what he could do. I mean, Chris, I've even heard some people say that look out for that program to be one of the surprise ones in the ACC the next couple of years. And then another huge job comes out and calls him and says, hey, come join us and lead our program. So we'll see.
Real quick, if they finish second behind Clemson, is that going to shock anybody? It shouldn't. Because right now it's them or NC State or Florida State who's not ready to do that yet.
Right.
There's nothing there, and they've got three good receivers, and Jurkovec, an outstanding quarterback. Offensively, they are the second best team behind Clemson. They're just not good defensively. They don't have the speed there. That's going to hold them back. But watch that team. They just ground and pound. A.J. Dillon behind, big physical offensive line. Offensive line's good. Got one of the best centers in the country. They've got three receivers that can line up and play for most big-time programs in the country, and a quarterback that can get them the football. They're going to be fun to watch. And you're right. I think he could parlay this into something real quick. And you know what else he's doing? He's going out. He knows they're doing two things that's really unique. They're recruiting nationally from the Catholic schools. It's a very prestigious Jesuit, so they recruit those. And then you know what he's doing? He says, I can't recruit 4- and 5-star kids, so I'm going to recruit 4- and 5-stars out of the transfer portal. Absolutely. And he's doing that, Ohio State and some other places. So he's trying to bring those in, particularly on defense. Now, Jeff is known on defense because that's what he was, the defense coordinator at Ohio State. But there's no question about it. Just if he goes out and look, he better be quiet about it. If you remember, Jeff Jagosinski, a good friend of mine, He quietly went and interviewed for another job, and they fired him. And this was right after, you remember, he had Matt Ryan, and things were going well, and they just fired him. So the good fathers don't like it when you and I say that as a Catholic boy going through Catholic school all my life. So absolutely.
Yeah, you and me both. And look, Boston's a nice place aside from the winters. I mean, the winters up there are pretty brutal, but aside from that, no, it's an awesome place. So, no, he's doing a great job. Dave Clawson also, too. I mean, another guy that you mentioned in there is a huge name. I mean, I work closely with Brian Finneran. He coached Brian Finneran. So, I mean, somebody that definitely is worthy of the praise that you gave him there in terms of being a great developmental leader of a program.
And you told me, but real quick, you told me you really took a shining to Bronco Mendenhall recently.
Oh.
And I've known Bronco for years and years. That's a guy that did a great job over the years at BYU. And listen, we're going to do I did ACC football and beyond before we came on. Next week, I'm going to break down Virginia Tech. That's a frustrating program, and I recommended Justin for that job. And, you can say that Virginia at least understands in the shorter period what they're looking for in terms of a player than even what they're doing at Virginia Tech right now.
Yeah, I mean, he is somebody that when I talked with him in Charlotte, and if you didn't have a chance to listen to that, go to southernsportstoday.com or download the Southern Sports Today app, and you can hear that interview that I had with them. But I wanted to do push-ups after I talked with Bronco Mendenhall, and he's not like a fiery, like, rah, 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 type of guy. it's how he directs his words that you're just kind of like, wow, that's awesome. He told us about simple successes, and it was something that I was like, hey, I can implement that in my life. So go listen to that. Chris, really appreciate the time as always. It's always great to catch up with you and do this show, as we will meet back up later on in the week. So we appreciate you. You can follow Chris on Twitter at Landry Football. You can follow me on Twitter at Dan Matthews ATL. We, of course, always appreciate you all chiming in with us on Twitter or with us right here on the comments section. So please do that. So once again, for Chris Landry, I'm Dan Matthews. This has been another episode of SEC Football Beyond. We will talk to you later on in the week.